The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 17 star systems. They were not conquerors or warriors. They were simply people who had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. So they built ships, and they went to find out. Lisa Grant stood on the observation deck of the Starship Endeavour, watching a blue and green planet rotate slowly below her. The planet was called New Eden, and it was home to almost 3 million humans. She could see clouds drifting over vast oceans and forests that stretched for thousands of miles. It was beautiful in a way that still surprised her. Even after 30 years of space travel, she was 53 years old. A commander in the United Earth Fleet, and she had never fired a weapon at another living being. None of them had. The fleet existed for rescue missions, scientific expeditions, and the occasional diplomatic escort. War was something humanity read about in history books, a relic of their primitive past on Earth. Kevin Shaw walked up beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. He was her first officer, a tall man with kind eyes and a habit of humming old songs when he thought no one was listening. "Beautiful morning," he said. Lisa took the coffee and smiled. Every morning out here is beautiful. On the surface of New Eden, in a small farming community called Riverside, a man named Daniel Carter was walking his daughter to school. Emma was 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. She was telling him about a dream she had, something about flying through clouds on the back of a giant bird. Daniel listened and nodded at all the right moments. He had been a construction worker back on Earth, building apartment buildings in what used to be called Chicago. Now he grew wheat under an orange sky. And he thought that was probably the best trade anyone had ever made. His wife Maria was already at work. She ran the community medical center, which mostly meant treating farming injuries, delivering babies, and giving out vaccines for the seasonal illnesses that came with living on a new world. She loved her work. She loved that she knew everyone in town by name, that she had watched children grow from infants to teenagers, that she was part of something small and good. This was humanity in the year 2347. Ordinary people doing ordinary things in extraordinary places. Teachers taught. Farmers farmed. Doctors healed. Children laughed and played and dreamed of futures that seemed bright and endless. Nobody thought about war. There was no reason to think about war. Humanity had encountered 7 intelligent species among the stars. The Velith were philosophers who communicated through color changes in their skin. The Morkai were traders who loved human music and paid ridiculous prices for vintage guitars. The Silni were shy and rarely left their homeworld. But they made the most beautiful artwork in the known galaxy. Relations with these species ranged from warm friendship to polite distance. But there had never been real conflict. The galaxy was too vast for such things, or so everyone believed. There was enough room for everyone, enough resources. Enough stars. The Endeavour orbited New Eden for 3 more days, conducting routine surveys and delivering supplies to the surface. Lisa had dinner with the colonial governor, a cheerful woman named Helen Park, who was more interested in discussing her tomato garden than politics. Kevin taught a group of local children how to play chess. The ship's cook, a man named Roberto Silva, traded recipes with the owner of Riverside's only restaurant. It was peaceful. It was normal. It was everything humanity had hoped to find among the stars. On the morning of the 4th day, Lisa was back on the observation deck with her coffee when the first alarm sounded. She did not understand what she was seeing at first. Ships were emerging from hyperspace, dozens of them, in formations that made no sense for civilian vessels. They were black and angular, covered in weapons that gleamed in the light of New Eden's sun. The Kethra had arrived. They were a species from the far edge of the galaxy. Beyond the borders of known space, they had spent 10,000 years conquering other worlds, absorbing other civilizations into their empire. They believed that strength was the only virtue, and that weakness deserved destruction. They had consumed 37 inhabited worlds before reaching human space. Most of those worlds had surrendered within days. A few had fought back and been destroyed anyway. The Kethra did not negotiate. They did not offer terms. They simply took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. They had studied humanity before their attack. They had noted that humans were peaceful, that they had no real military, that their ships were designed for exploration rather than combat. They had calculated that humanity would be easy prey. The first Kethra weapons struck the orbital station above New Eden at exactly 08 for 7 hours. The station was home to 3,000 people, including scientists, engineers, and their families. It had no shields worth mentioning, no weapons capable of fighting back. It was simply a place where people lived and worked. The station burned for 11 minutes before it broke apart completely. Lisa Grant watched it happen. She watched pieces of metal and glass tumble through space, glowing orange with heat. She knew that somewhere in that debris were people she had spoken with, shared meals with, considered friends. Her coffee cup fell from her hand and shattered on the floor. Around her, the bridge crew stood frozen in shock. These were scientists and explorers. They had trained for asteroid impacts, engine failures, medical emergencies. They had never trained for this. Kevin turned to her, his face pale. "Commander." Lisa did not answer immediately. She was thinking about her sons back on Earth, about their faces and their voices and the last time she had hugged them. She was thinking about the families on that station, about children who had been eating breakfast when the weapons struck. She was thinking about the 3 million people on the planet below, who were just now beginning to understand that their peaceful lives had ended, and then something changed inside her. Something very old. Something that humanity had tried to forget, but had never truly lost. It rose up from somewhere deep, and it pushed aside the shock and the fear and the grief. "All hands to battle stations," she said. Her voice was calm now, steady in a way that surprised even her. "Commander, we are a research vessel. We have minimal weapons, almost no armor, and our shields are designed for radiation, not combat." Lisa looked at her first officer. "Then we will be a very determined research vessel. Get us between that fleet and the planet." Kevin stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded and began giving orders. The Endeavor moved. It was slow and clumsy compared to the Kethra warships, and its weapons were laughable, but it moved anyway. It placed itself between the enemy and New Eden, between the hunters and the hunted. On the surface below, Daniel Carter heard the emergency sirens begin to wail. He looked up at the sky and saw streaks of fire where the orbital station was falling. Maria came running from the medical center, her face tight with fear. "Get Emma," she said. "We need to get to the evacuation point." Daniel did not argue. He picked up his daughter, held her tight against his chest, and began to run. Above them, the Endeavor opened fire on the Kethra vanguard. The battle had begun. The Endeavor was never meant for combat. Everyone on the bridge knew this. Lisa Grant knew it better than anyone. The ship had been designed to study stars and map planets and carry scientists to distant worlds. Its weapons were meant for breaking apart asteroids that threatened colonial shipping lanes. Its shields could handle solar radiation and minor debris. Nothing more. Against the Kethra warships, it should have lasted minutes. Perhaps seconds. It lasted 47 minutes. Lisa stood at the center of the bridge, calling out orders as explosions rocked the ship around her. Power systems failed and came back online. Crew members fell and were replaced by others. The hull groaned and screamed as weapons fire tore through sections that had never been designed to take such punishment. "Forward batteries target the lead ship. Helm, keep us between them and the planet. Engineering, I need everything you can give me to the shields." The lead Kethra vessel was 3 times the size of the Endeavor. It had weapons that could crack a moon in half. It should have destroyed them with a single volley. But Lisa had done something the Kethra did not expect. She had rammed the Endeavor directly into their formation, so close that their larger weapons could not target her without risking friendly fire. She had turned a desperate disadvantage into a desperate advantage. Why are they not dying? The Kethra commander demanded on his bridge. They are a research vessel. They have no military training. Why are they still fighting? He did not understand. He could not understand. The Kethra had conquered 37 worlds, and in all that time, they had never faced an enemy like this. Other species had fought back with soldiers and weapons and military strategy. Humanity was fighting back with scientists and explorers, and a stubborn, refusal to accept reality. Kevin Shaw was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He had been thrown against a console when a torpedo struck their starboard side. He stood back up and kept working. "Commander, evacuation shuttles are launching from the surface. They need more time." Lisa looked at the tactical display. Hundreds of small icons were rising from New Eden, each one representing a shuttle packed with civilians, families, children, people who had woken up this morning thinking about breakfast and school and work. Not about running for their lives. "Then we give them more time," she said. The Endeavour dove deeper into the Kethra formation. Its weapons were weak, but they found targets anyway. A sensor array here, a weapon emplacement there, small damages that added up. Annoyances that kept the enemy focused on them rather than on the fleeing shuttles. On the surface of New Eden, Daniel Carter was running through streets filled with chaos. Emma was crying against his shoulder, her small arms wrapped tight around his neck. Maria was beside him, helping an elderly neighbor named George, who could not move fast on his own. "Keep going," Maria said. "Don't look back." Daniel did not look back. He did not need to. He could hear the explosions above them, could see the flashes of light reflected in windows and puddles. He knew what was happening up there. Someone was buying them time. Around them, the people of Riverside were evacuating with a strange, desperate calm. Teachers were leading groups of children in orderly lines, counting heads and calling names. Neighbors were carrying neighbors. Strangers were becoming family in the space of minutes. A young man named Tyler helped an injured woman into a transport vehicle. A teenage girl named Sophia kept her younger siblings calm by telling them it was all a game, an adventure, something exciting rather than terrifying. An old farmer named Harold refused to leave his property until he had released his animals, giving them a chance to survive whatever was coming. The Kethra had expected screaming and panic. They had expected humans to trample each other in their rush to escape. That was what other species had done. That was what prey always did. Instead, they watched humans organize. They watched humans help each other. They watched humans show courage they did not know they had. Back on the Endeavour, the end was coming. Lisa could feel it in the shuddering of the deck beneath her feet, could see it in the damage reports scrolling across her screens. Half the ship was on fire. The other half was venting atmosphere. They had minutes left, maybe less, Commander Kevin said quietly. The last shuttles are away. They are going to make it. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her sons again, about the last messages she had sent them, about all the things she had meant to say, but never had. She thought about the people on those shuttles, the children who would grow up because of what was happening here. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies. I want everyone to hear this." It's a communication officer, a young woman named Amy, whose hands were shaking, but whose voice was steady. Made it happen. Lisa spoke into the silence. Her words went out across human space, to every ship and every colony and every person with a receiver. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of the United Earthship Endeavour. We are engaging the enemy above New Eden. To all vessels, all colonies, all citizens of Earth, this is not a drill. This is not a mistake. They came here to destroy us, to take our worlds and kill our people. They will learn that was a mistake." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. Scientists and explorers, all of them. People who had chosen peace and discovery, who had never wanted to be warriors. They looked back at her, and in their eyes she saw fear, but also something else, something that looked like determination. "Endeavour out," she said. The ship made one final charge at the Kethra flagship. It was not a military maneuver. There was no tactical advantage to gain. It was simply a refusal to stop, a declaration that these humans would fight until there was nothing left to fight with. The Kethra. Commander watched the broken vessel coming toward him and felt something he had not felt in decades of conquest. He felt uncertain. The Endeavour struck the flagship's forward section at full speed. The explosion was visible from the surface of New Eden, a new star blooming briefly in the morning sky. Daniel Carter saw it. He was on an evacuation shuttle now, climbing away from the planet, Emma still crying in his arms and Maria's hand tight in his. He did not know whose ship had just died. He did not know their names, or their faces, or their stories, but he knew what they had done. They had given his family a chance. "Thank you," he whispered, to no one and everyone. On ships and stations throughout human space, people heard Lisa Grant's final transmission. They heard the calm voice of a commander who knew she was about to die and chose to face it anyway. They heard the words that would echo through history. "They came here to destroy us. They will learn that was a mistake." Something changed in humanity that day. Something that had been sleeping for centuries woke up. It was not anger. Not exactly. It was not hatred. It was something older and deeper. Something written into human genes by millions of years of survival. It was the knowledge that when someone threatens your family, your people, your future, you do not surrender. You do not give up. You fight. The Kethra had come looking for easy prey. They had found something else entirely. They just did not know it yet. On an evacuation shuttle, climbing away from a burning world, a 7-year-old girl named Emma Carter stopped crying. She looked out the window at the stars, at the flashes of distant combat, at the future that had just been stolen and would have to be taken back. She did not understand everything that was happening. She was too young for that. But she understood enough. She understood that someone had died so that she could live, and she would never forget it. The news of New Eden spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every colony knew what had happened. Every station, every ship, every person with access to a communication terminal. They watched the recordings of the attack. They heard Commander Lisa Grant's final transmission. They saw the images of burning stations and fleeing shuttles and a research vessel charging into an enemy fleet with no hope of survival. And then humanity began to change. On Earth, in a small city that had once been called Seattle, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Moore walked into a military recruitment center. She was 67 years old. Her hair was gray, her joints ached in the morning, and she had spent the last 4 decades teaching children how to read and write. The officer behind the desk looked up at her with confusion. "Can I help you?" "I want to enlist," Patricia said. The officer blinked. "Ma'am, with respect, you are too old for combat duty." "The age limit is—" "I do not care about combat duty," Patricia interrupted. "I can cook. I can organize. I can communicate. I can teach young soldiers how to write letters home to their families. I can do something. Put me somewhere useful." The officer started to protest again, but Patricia cut him off with a look that had silenced thousands of unruly students over the years. He closed his mouth. Behind Patricia, a line was forming. It stretched out the door and around the block. Young and old, men and women, people from every background and profession. They had all seen the same images. They had all heard the same words. "They came here to destroy us. They will learn that was a mistake." On Mars. In the industrial sectors where humanity built the ships and machines that had carried them to the stars, factory workers gathered in enormous assembly halls. They were engineers and welders and technicians, people who had spent their lives building agricultural equipment and mining vehicles and transport shuttles. A foreman named Luis Hernandez stood before them. He was a short man with thick arms and a voice that carried across the largest factory floor without amplification. "We have never built a warship," he said. "We do not have blueprints for weapons. We do not have military contracts or government orders. We have nothing but our hands and our knowledge and our determination." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "Let's figure it out." They cheered. Not with words, but with a sound that was older than language. A sound of agreement. A sound of purpose. A sound that said they would do whatever was necessary. 6 months later, the shipyards of Mars produced the first human vessel designed purely for combat. They called it the Defiance, and it was ugly and practical and bristling with weapons that had been invented by people who had never studied military engineering but had refused to let that stop them. But the response was not only soldiers and engineers. Humanity's answer to the Kethra was total, involving every person and every skill. Artists created images and videos that spread hope and courage across human space. A painter named Victor Gomez worked for 3 days without sleep, producing a mural of the Endeavor making its final charge. Copies of that image appeared on walls and screens throughout the colonies, a reminder of what ordinary people could do. Musicians wrote songs that became anthems. A young singer named Melody James composed a piece called "Remember New Eden" that made grown soldiers weep and then stand up straighter. Ready to fight again, writers documented every story of sacrifice and heroism, ensuring that no one would be forgotten. A journalist named Oscar Fuentes traveled from colony to colony, recording the testimonies of survivors and the words of those preparing to fight. His books would become required reading for generations. Psychologists developed programs to help survivors cope with the trauma of what they had witnessed. Doctors created new medical techniques for treating injuries that humanity had never faced before. Teachers rewrote their lessons to include civil defense and emergency procedures, preparing the next generation for a galaxy that was no longer safe. A chef named Rosa Martinez organized a network of volunteers across human space. Her mission was simple. Every soldier before deployment would receive a home-cooked meal. Not military rations, not processed food, but something made with love and care. "They are fighting for us," she explained to anyone who asked. "The least we can do is remind them what they are fighting for." Young programmer named Ethan Brooks, barely 22 years old and fresh out of university, created a communication system that allowed scattered human forces to coordinate across distances that should have made coordination impossible. He worked for 3 days without sleep, surviving on coffee and determination and the memory of an older sister who had died on New Eden. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion, other programmers took over his work. They improved it. They expanded it. They built on his foundation until human ships could share information instantly. Turning a scattered fleet into a coordinated force, the Kethra had studied humanity before their attack. They had noted that humans were divided by nations and languages and politics. They had seen the arguments and disagreements that seemed to define human society. They had calculated that humanity would splinter under pressure, that old divisions would widen into fatal cracks. They had made a terrible mistake. They had failed to understand something fundamental about humans. Yes, humans argued with each other. Yes, they disagreed about politics and religion and 1,000 other things. They could be petty and selfish and cruel to one another, but when something threatened them from outside, when an enemy attacked their people and their homes and their children, those divisions vanished like morning fog. Humans stopped being Americans or Chinese or Brazilian. They stopped being conservative or liberal, religious or secular. They became simply human, and unified humanity was something the galaxy had never seen before. On a refugee station orbiting Jupiter, Daniel Carter watched the transformation happen around him. People who had fled New Eden with nothing were volunteering for every task they could find. His wife Maria had already begun working in the station's medical bay, training others in the emergency techniques she had developed during the evacuation. Daniel himself had never held a weapon in his life. He was a farmer. He understood soil and seeds and seasons. He understood how to grow things, not how to destroy them. But he looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in a corner of their cramped refugee quarters, and he thought about the people who had died so that she could be here. The next morning, he walked into a recruitment center. The officer behind the desk asked him about his skills and experience. "I built things on Earth," Daniel said. "Construction. Then I farmed on New Eden. I do not know how to fight." The officer nodded. "We will teach you," good Daniel said. And he meant it. Across human space, millions of people were making the same choice. Not because they wanted war. Not because they hated the Kethra, but because someone had threatened their families, their homes, their future, and humans, it turned out, would do anything to protect those things. The Kethra had awakened something that humanity itself had forgotten existed. Something ancient and powerful and absolutely terrifying. They just did not know it yet. The war lasted 11 years. In the beginning, humanity lost. They lost badly. They lost colonies and stations and ships. They lost people by the thousands, then by the hundreds of thousands. The Kethra were better trained, better equipped, and had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Humanity was learning as they went, paying for every lesson in blood, but they did not stop. They did not surrender. They did not break. Admiral Benjamin Cole had been a merchant captain before the war. He had transported cargo and passengers between colonies, a peaceful job for a peaceful time. Now he commanded the human fleet, and he had learned tactics from old books and desperate necessity. The Battle of Proxima was humanity's first real victory. It happened 18 months into the war, at a star system that had been considered indefensible. The Kethra brought 40 warships. Cole had 23, most of them converted civilian vessels. He should have retreated. Any sensible commander would have retreated. Instead, he did something the Kethra did not expect. He attacked. "They think we are afraid," Cole said to his bridge crew before the battle. "They think we will run. Let us show them what humans do when they are afraid." The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Kethra fleet had been destroyed. But humanity had paid a terrible price. 60 ships lost. 18,000 dead. The wreckage of both fleets drifted through space like a metal graveyard. Cole broadcast his report to all of humanity. His voice was tired, heavy with grief, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded like hope. Every species in this galaxy thinks of us as the friendly ones. The traitors. The diplomats. The ones who would rather talk than fight. And they are right. We would rather talk. We would rather build. We would rather laugh with our children and grow old with our partners and live in peace. But when you take that choice away from us, when you force us to fight, you will discover that the same passion we bring to love, we bring to war. Those words spread across human space. They were painted on ships and printed on posters and spoken by soldiers before battle. They became a rallying cry for a species that was learning to fight. The war continued. Victories came more often now, though they were always costly. Humanity was getting better at war, even as it hated what it was becoming. At the Siege of Haven, a colony of artists and musicians held their position for 8 months against a Kethra occupation force. They had no military training, no heavy weapons, nothing but improvised explosives and a stubborn refusal to surrender. Their leader was a sculptor named Grace Palmer. Before the war, she had created beautiful works of art from metal and stone. Now, she created traps and ambushes, turning her understanding of materials and structures into something deadly. "They keep expecting us to give up," she told her people during the darkest days of the siege. "They keep waiting for us to accept that we have lost. They do not understand us at all." Haven was eventually relieved by a fleet that had traveled for weeks to reach them. Grace Palmer survived. She spent the rest of the war as one of humanity's most respected tactical advisors, a sculptor who had learned to create destruction instead of beauty. The defense of Earth came in the 7th year of the war. A massive Kethra fleet broke through human defenses and headed for humanity's homeworld. If they reached planetary bombardment range, billions would die. An aging battleship called the Horizon stood in their path. Its commander was a young officer named Christopher Lane, barely 30 years old, promoted to fast because the war had killed too many experienced leaders. His ship was outgunned and outmatched. His first officer said quietly, "They will destroy us in minutes." Christopher looked at the tactical display. He looked at the enemy fleet, at the distance to Earth, at the impossible math of the situation. He thought about his parents in their small house in what used to be called Kansas, about his younger sister who was training to be a doctor, about every person on that blue planet who was depending on him. "Then we will be a very stubborn obstacle for those minutes," he said. Helm ramming speed. The Horizon struck the lead Kethra dreadnought at full velocity. The collision destroyed both vessels and scattered the enemy formation, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. By some miracle, Christopher Lane survived, pulled from the wreckage by rescue teams, who found him floating in space with a broken spine. He spent the rest of the war fighting from a wheelchair, commanding ships from his chair because he refused to stop fighting even when his body no longer worked properly, and everywhere. In every battle, in every occupied territory, ordinary humans found extraordinary courage. Maria Carter became a field surgeon. She operated in makeshift medical bays on damaged ships, in underground bunkers on occupied worlds, conditions that would have made peacetime doctors weep. Her hands, which had once delivered babies and treated farming injuries, now saved soldiers who should have died. "You will not die today," she would tell them as she worked. "I will not allow it." Most of them believed her. Many of them survived because of that belief. Daniel Carter joined the infantry. He was not a natural soldier. He was a farmer who still dreamed of wheat fields and orange skies. But he trained, and he fought, and he learned to kill because his daughter deserved a galaxy without monsters in it. He was wounded 3 times. He was promoted twice. He lost friends whose names he whispered to himself every night before sleep. A litany of the dead that grew longer with each passing year. Emma Carter, who had been 7 years old when her world burned, grew up in refugee camps and military bases. She learned to fly before she learned to drive. By the time she was 18, she was piloting a fighter craft. It's one of the best in the fleet. She flew with a photograph taped to her console. It was a picture of her grandmother, a woman named Linda Carter, who had died on the orbital station above New Eden. Emma had never met her. She had been too young, but she carried her grandmother's image into every battle, a reminder of why she was fighting. 3 generations of one family, all fighting the same war. And they were not unique. Across human space, every family had a similar story. Parents and children and grandchildren, united by grief and determined to ensure that grief would not be repeated. The Kethra did not understand this. They could not understand it. In their culture, families were tools for producing warriors, nothing more. The idea that humans would fight harder because of love, because of connections to people, both living and dead, was alien to them. It was also the reason they were losing. 10 years into the war, the tide had turned decisively. Human fleets were pushing into Kethra territory. Occupied colonies were being liberated. The enemy that had once seemed invincible was now retreating. And Emma Carter, no longer a frightened child, but a battle-hardened pilot, was leading the charge. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like?" her wingman asked her one day. "If they had never come? If we had just stayed farmers and traders and explorers?" Emma thought about the question for a long time. She thought about the wheat fields of New Eden, about her father's hand in hers as they walked to school, about a childhood that had ended in fire and blood. "We would have been happy," she said finally, "but we would never have known how strong we could be." The war continued, but now, for the first time, humanity could see the end approaching. The war ended not with a single decisive battle, but with a slow, grinding realization on the part of the Kethra that they had made a catastrophic mistake. They had conquered 37 worlds before reaching human space. Most of those conquests had taken weeks. A few had taken months. None had taken more than a year. The pattern had been consistent for 10,000 years. Attack. Destroy resistance. Occupy. Move on. Humanity had held them for 11 years. Had pushed them back. Had reclaimed lost territory. Had turned farmers into soldiers, and scientists into generals and children into warriors who showed no mercy. Now the human fleet was in orbit above, Kethra homeworld, and the equation had reversed completely. Admiral Emma Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Legacy. She was 32 years old now, with gray already streaking her dark hair. She had earned every one of those gray hairs. She had lost her father at the Battle of Centauri when she was 23. She had held her mother's hand as Maria passed away from a wound that had never properly healed. She had buried friends and comrades and lovers, but she was still here. Humanity was still here. Below her, the Kethra homeworld turned slowly. It was a harsh planet, all red deserts and black mountains, a place that had bred a harsh people. For 10,000 years, they had looked up at the stars and seen only opportunities for conquest. Now they looked up and saw human warships. The Kethra High Commander requested a communication channel. His species had a concept of honor that required them to speak with their conquerors before surrender. They had performed this ritual many times, always on the receiving end. This was the first time they would be performing it from the other side. His face appeared on the view screen. The Kethra were tall and angular, with 4 arms and eyes that were completely black. The High Commander was old by their standards, his skin pale and mottled with age. He had led his people for 40 years. He had never expected to see them defeated. "Human Commander," he said. His voice was translated by computer systems, but even through the translation, Emma could hear the confusion in it, the disbelief. "I have one question before we discuss terms," Emma nodded. "Ask how." The word seemed to cost him something. "You were not warriors. Your species had no military tradition. You had no experience with total war. Your ships were made for exploration, your people trained for peace. How did you become this?" Emma looked at him through the view screen. She thought about all the people she had lost. She thought about the photograph of her grandmother, still taped to the console of her old fighter craft. She thought about her father's hands, calloused from farming, learning to hold a weapon. She thought about her mother's voice, telling wounded soldiers they would not die today. She thought about Commander Lisa Grant, who had bought time for evacuation shuttles with a research vessel in her own life. "You made a mistake," Emma said. "You saw us as we were, peaceful, divided, soft. You thought that was weakness. But those things were never weakness. They were choice." She stood straighter, her hands clasped behind her back. "We chose peace because we valued life. We chose to be soft with each other because hardness is exhausting and kindness is better. We chose to argue among ourselves because we believed in the right to disagree. None of that was weakness. All of it was strength that we had decided not to use." The High Commander said nothing. He simply watched her with those black eyes. "You forced us to become hard," Emma continued. "You forced us to fight. You killed our families and burned our homes and gave us no choice but to answer with the same violence you brought to us. And in doing so, you discovered something that every species in this galaxy will now understand." She leaned forward slightly. "Humans are just people. We laugh. We cry. We fall in love and raise children and dream of better days. We are farmers and teachers and artists and builders. We are everything you thought we were." Her voice hardened. "But when something threatens our people, our families, our future, we are also the most stubborn, vengeful, determined species you will ever face. We do not give up. We do not break. We do not stop. We just keep coming, generation after generation, until the threat is gone." The High Commander was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. "We surrender unconditionally," he said. "Do with us as you will." Emma looked at him. She thought about all the worlds the Kethra had destroyed, all the species they had enslaved or exterminated. She thought about New Eden burning, about her childhood ending in fire and fear. She could destroy them. She had the power. No one would blame her. After everything they had done, they deserved destruction. But that was not what humanity was. "We will not destroy your world," she said. "We will not enslave your people. We will occupy your territory until we are certain you are no longer a threat, and then we will leave. You will live with the memory of what you did and what was done in response. That will be your punishment." The High Commander looked up, surprise evident on his alien face. "You show us mercy?" "After everything." Emma shook her head. "Not mercy. Humanity. We are not you. We never were. We never will be." She ended the transmission. In the months that followed, humanity did exactly what Emma had promised. They occupied Kethra space, disarmed their fleets, and established a peace that would last. They did not take revenge. They did not commit atrocities. They remained, even in victory, the people they had always been, and then slowly began to rebuild. The colonies that had been destroyed were rebuilt. The people who had been scattered returned home. Life resumed, different from before, but recognizable. Farmers farmed. Teachers taught. Doctors healed. Children laughed. Daniel Carter did not live to see the end of the war. He died at the Battle of Centauri, protecting a transport ship full of refugees. He died thinking of Emma, hoping she would forgive him for leaving. Maria Carter survived for 3 more years, long enough to see humanity turn the tide. She died in a hospital bed, surrounded by the soldiers she had saved. Her hand and her daughters, Emma Carter returned to where New Eden had been. The planet was scarred but healing, and new settlements were being built. She walked through the fields where her father had once grown wheat. She planted the first seeds of a new crop. Across human space, memorials were built. Every world that had been touched by war had a place where the names of the dead were inscribed. 200 million names, spanning 11 years of conflict. No one would be forgotten, and in the wider galaxy. The other species watched and learned and understood something they had never understood before. Humans were friendly. They were curious. They were the best trading partners and the most interesting conversationalists and the most creative artists. They laughed easily and loved deeply and dreamed of futures full of wonder. They were also necessary, the most terrifying warriors the universe had ever seen, because humanity was just people. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. But when those ordinary people were threatened, when their families and homes and futures were at risk, they became something else entirely. They became unstoppable. The Kethra had learned this lesson at the cost of their empire. Every other species in the galaxy made certain to remember it. No one ever attacked humanity again, and on a rebuilt world called New Eden. Under an orange sky, Emma Carter watched her own children running through wheat fields. She thought about everything that had been lost and everything that had been saved. She thought about her parents and her grandmother and all the people who had died so that this moment could exist. "Thank you," she whispered to no one and everyone. Then she smiled, and she went to join her children in the golden grain. Humanity had paid a terrible price to survive, but they had survived. They had proven what they were capable of when pushed to the edge. And now they would return to being what they had always wanted to be. Just people. Living ordinary lives, under extraordinary stars,